Yeah. Okay. So, yeah, we're back, and this week we're going to move on to talking about a library for interacting with data called Pandas. So that's this little guy over here, or girl over here. And we'll get into that in just a little bit. But the first thing that we'll start with maybe is just a summary of the feedback that you've given us. So we did, I think, get a pretty good response in terms of the people that filled out this Elomaker form. There was something like 40 plus responses, so that's quite good, and we appreciate getting the feedback from you. And I also like to, and I think probably Hendricky's the same way, I like to share the feedback when we have it, so you can kind of see what are the other people thinking. If you have your idea of how the course is going, it's always nice to know what the others think as well. So here we are. This is not all of the responses that we have, but this is the majority represented here in the summary that we have. And yeah, regarding the pace of the lessons, well, it seems like on average for most people it's okay. Some of those who have a bit of experience with programming previously find it a bit slow. And those who are totally new to programming sometimes find it a bit fast, and that's about the same as we experienced last year, and that's kind of to be expected on some level. That, you know, if we're reviewing a concept you're already familiar with, it's not a surprise that you're getting a little bit bored. And we try to avoid that, but we also want to make sure that those of you who are totally new to programming aren't just lost right from the beginning. So there was at least a couple comments about me sometimes going a bit too quickly when typing things, so sorry for that. I will try to slow down. I think we mentioned this last week as well, that I'll try to slow down when I'm typing. That's harder to do than it seems, but I'll try and focus on that again for this week. And we had a number of people who complained about taking a bit too much time to go through the exercise at the start of the lesson. Last week was certainly somewhat exceptional. We don't normally plan to spend that much time, but we also got the message pretty clearly that we shouldn't spend that much time, so we won't. And there was at least one person asking about getting the materials in advance for the lessons. We can do that sometimes. You know, like the lesson for today is a new thing, so it's a bit hard to get that together in advance. But it's a good thing for us to know for the future that it might be nice to post the things a couple days ahead of time. If you want to look at the lesson ahead of time and then have questions in mind when you get here, we understand. That's a good point.
Yeah, at least next year it should be possible to do as we have all the stuff ready.
Yeah. So regarding the content of the lessons, this feedback was almost exactly the same as what was said last year. Most people find it to be about right. Those with programming experience find it to be a little bit too easy, and occasionally some topics are challenging for other people, and certain topics are just more challenging by nature of just what they are. So, you know, things like for loops and functions, that stuff takes a little bit more time to understand than defining a variable. But that feedback really, it was strikingly similar to what we got last year. And the important thing, I guess, for us is that it seems like it's about right on average. For the exercises, again, most people find them to be about right. There are some of you who noted it took quite a lot of time to complete some of the exercises. And yeah, sometimes that's just how it goes. You do have to put in a bit more time just to kind of have things click in your head from time to time. So, you know, hopefully this doesn't consume all of your time, but we do know that, you know, sometimes things take a bit. There were also a few people that were kind of asking about maybe having variable levels of questions, and this is something we can try to incorporate in the future exercises where we can give the exercise questions very much in the way that we have been doing it, but we can also then have a version of the same question just with less guidance. So like if you want to have a little bit more freedom to kind of think about how you would solve the problem, if we just tell you what you need to come up with at the end, then we could think about doing that. So for those who, again, have a bit of previous programming experience, maybe what you want to be learning is, ways to combine what you know to solve a problem without so much structure of first do this, then do this, then do this. Maybe we'll just give you what the goal is in the end and let you come up with what you can.
Yeah, and then there were a few who hoped that there would be easier questions and problems in the beginning. So for example, the exercise this week has been built in a way that there are basically these kind of quite similar questions and problems that we go through the lesson now. So that has been now taken into account.
Yep. And regarding the aspects of the course that are helpful for you, well, it seems like most everything came up there. So the exercises, the lesson materials online, sort of step-by-step instructions, the videos, the questions in class, and our attempt to get you to work on real-life tasks. As much as we can, we try to avoid these kind of just generic computer science style problems where you just demonstrate how some function works using some kind of random data. To the best of our abilities, we're going to continue to work on real data from here on out, and especially since this week we'll learn how to read in data files. That makes that task a little bit easier because we can take data files we can find online and interact with those. The only thing I saw notably missing here from this list is Slack. So I know some of you like using Slack and others maybe not so much. Things that are not so helpful for you, well, I put in bold here. It doesn't show up that well, but too much time spent reviewing the last exercise. That was clear. And at least one person or a couple people mentioned going to the lectures wasn't helpful. Well, that's mainly because there are other ways to complete the course. You don't have to be here. We're, of course, happy that you are, and that's why there's little sad faces here, because we'd like to see you. But you don't necessarily need to be here to complete the course, and we recognize that by putting everything online. You can sleep in on Wednesday morning if you want, but don't do that. Some people thought the exercises are too hard. Again, that varies from person to person, and sometimes certain exercises are going to be more difficult for you than others. Hopefully by the end you sort of surprise yourself by being able to do things that you didn't necessarily think you could, or solving a problem that you were previously would have really struggled with. We hope everyone will get there. There were also a couple mentions of the exercise hints being a little vague sometimes, so we can maybe try to be more specific with certain hints to. This comment came up in the context that sometimes you've worked on the exercise for a couple hours and you're stuck and you really want to know specifically how to do something, and you get this generic hint, and I don't know, the person seemed a little bit irritated by that. That you want to know, just okay, I want to move on to the next part. How do I get past this? So that if the hints aren't doing it for you, you can always post in Slack for the exercise, even though you might not love using Slack. That's a good place to get a response pretty quickly. I guess most people who have posted in Slack have gotten responses usually within within an hour. Yeah. I think in most cases, one of us has Slack open and will respond unless you post at like maybe 4 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah,
you might get a few hours before one of us wakes up. But up until about 1, you should be good.
Yeah, and also if you are kind of facing difficulties, so the practical sessions are the place where you can actually get help, and quite many of you were happy to actually for the assistance that we have. So please go there.
Yeah.
They are for you.
Yeah. And then just about the suggestions to improve the course, the grades for the exercise sooner rather than later. The grades, I guess maybe there's a bit of confusion because this came up in a message that was sent to me over email about the grades. If you haven't noticed, Vuokko and Antti and Samuli and Yorina have been posting at the end of the readme.md file for your exercises, your grade for that exercise, as soon as they're finished grading. So I believe now that all of the exercises 2 and 3 have been graded, so you should be able to go and see in your own repository what your grade was. We have not been updating these little grade repositories that we checked out just because that takes more time than we anticipated. And requires more work than anticipated. So they've just been leaving the marks just on your exercise itself, so you can go there and find.
Yeah, we will update the grades repositories at some point, but for now, because there are already 2 places where they need to sign your grades, so that's been a bit overloaded.
Yeah. If we can find a way to automate that, then we'll do that as well. A few easier exercise questions. I think that's been incorporated at least for this week's exercise. More time explaining for loops. This question or this comment I think comes up regularly. For loops just take a little while to understand, and believe it or not, we have spent more time on it this year than in the past. But it still just takes a while to click.
Yeah, and I guess also the exercise 3 that was kind of thought to be difficult, it was also about the kind of concept of for loop, which is actually a pretty difficult thing to grasp, so it also affects.
Otherwise, I don't need to read everything that's here, but there were some good comments and suggestions for improving the course, and we will try to incorporate those in the remaining weeks of the course, and then certainly as well for next year when we revise the materials. And any general comments? There was one person who the only thing they posted was that they didn't post for any of the other questions, but just that the exercise instructions were too specific. So sorry. And GitHub is still not really that clear to me. While that's, again, it does take a bit of time to sort of understand how files are stored and managed in GitHub, and if you have questions, I think maybe the practical sessions that would be the place to have a chance to sit down with someone who's a more regular GitHub user, like Vuokko might be good for this. I don't know about Antti and Samuli, how much GitHub they're using, but
at least Vuokko. And us, of course.
And us, So if there's things about GitHub that are unclear, sometimes it's a matter of just like one question gets answered, and then all of a sudden you're like, oh, I get it.
There has been about using GitHub, so there has been kind of comments and questions about why are we doing it so as we are doing, so basically just dragging and dropping the files, and why don't we use like terminal, so command prompt to actually interact with GitHub. So of course, if you are willing to do that, you can do it. That is how we are basically interacting with GitHub. We don't use the internet page for doing it. And there are some kind of tutorials and materials in the website. So there are these page resources, and there are basically links to different tutorials using Git from command prompt and how you can, different ways of using GitHub. So there are these tutorials in here. So if you're interested of kind of learning how to use Git from command prompt or terminal, you can go and check those.
This top one in particular, the try Git, is really neat because you basically work in a terminal on a web page. So it's a cool way to learn how to use Git from a website as if you're sitting in front of a terminal window. And there are some other examples here too. Yes, so thanks again for the feedback. We appreciate it, and if you have anything else, you're always welcome to let us know.
And one thing, not about the feedback, but if you have like questions during the lesson, so please go and use the Slack channel for lesson 5, lesson 4, and lesson 6, basically. So we have these channels. So during the lesson, so we are following up this page during the lesson, so we can basically see that if something is bothering you or you have a question, so we can actually kind of check that out and answer to you.
Yeah, and the important thing here is that we did see a few questions that were posted in the poll, like on the polling page for last week's exercise. And the problem is we don't look at that after we put it up initially. And so if you post in Slack, then we'll actually see the questions. We didn't see any of the questions from last week until last night sometime when I started updating the poll for this week. So yeah, and we had a list here of some other things we just wanted to mention. Maybe there's a good time to do that before we take a quick look at the exercise and then move on to the lesson for this week. Just some general feedback about the exercises here. It sounds like from the graders maybe there aren't as many comments as we might like to see in your code. I know it takes a little bit of time, but it's a really good habit to get into if you can force yourself to write comments when you're writing your code to explain what it does. It might not seem that this would be a problem in the course right now because you're just, I got to work on this exercise, it's due in 2 hours and I just want to get it done. But when you come into situations where you're writing your own code and you have to step away from it for a few weeks and come back, the comments can save you a huge amount of time. So that's our plea once again to make sure that you put comments in.
Yeah.
They are more useful than you might think.
Yeah, it's good that it kind of becomes a habit for you to do it. So that's what we are aiming at here.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess there were also some issues with perhaps overthinking some of the problems, coming up with solutions that were more complicated than they need to be. That's, that happens.
Yeah. In programming, overthinking things is something that happens quite commonly, especially when you start programming. So things that we do are actually fairly simple things, but somehow our brains work in a way that they try to make them more difficult than it should be.
So we have also here just a general note about functions. I know some of you were maybe confused about the definitions of variables and functions and how they're used and things like that.
We can go that with the exercise 4.
Yeah, we'll take a look at that with the exercise. There is a note here that is mentioned at the start of the exercise for this week, exercise 5, about just making your code look nice, or pretty code as Walkla says here. There are small things like putting spaces between your variable name and this enter, or so an equal sign, and then some value you're assigning to it, that make the code easier to read. When you write everything without any spaces between the mathematical operators, for instance, sometimes you can miss them or overlook some of those things. There is a style guide for writing Python code called PEP 8. At least one of you mentioned it to us in the course feedback, so thanks again for that. But among other things, in terms of styling your code, they do have these just best practices for making readable Python code. There is a philosophy to how one should write nice looking Python code. We're just learning how to do it right now, but you can learn how to do it in a way that also makes your code easy to read. And so there's a link to this style guide where you can take a look at some of the tips at the start of the exercise for this week. Otherwise, I think that kind of covers that stuff, and maybe we'll take a quick look at exercise 4 and then move on to the lesson.